Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you got a snack or got to stretch your legs for a bit because you are in for a real treat with our keynote speaker. But before we hop back in, I wanted to make a quick note that the countdown timer in your breakout rooms in the top right does not reflect the actual schedule for today. We're still operating according to the agenda. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Judge Ricky McCoy Mitchell to introduce our keynote speaker.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is my extreme pleasure and honor to introduce to you Mr. Kojo Garti-Tagoe, who is the Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer, and Corporate Secretary at Duke Energy. And as I spoke to him, he's going to be able to tell you in great detail what that all actually means. But wanted to also share with you briefly as we'll get a chance to talk in more detail. And I did want to take a moment and make sure that you understand that although we have had several different questions that have been submitted by students, we as well will hopefully have enough time to be able to allow you to turn on your audio and video to be able to ask questions as well. And I want to make sure it looks like my video, is my video still on? Okay, good.
We can see you.
Very good. I just wanted to make sure. I know I didn't want to cloud out the handsome sight that they were seeing already. As we talk about it, Mr. Garti-Tagoe is a native of Ghana. And he actually earned his Bachelor of Arts degree with joint honors in economics and finance from McGill University in Montreal, Quebec. He also earned his Juris Doctorate from Duke University, that we're going to forgive him for that portion of it, but we will still be excited about him being here. As he does, he was conferred an honorary Doctor of Humanities degree by Francis Marion University, and he completed an advanced management program at Wharton Business School. I am excited as well because understanding despite, and he will talk to you about that, his priorities, that despite all of that, he still allowed, and I will thank his wife and his lovely wife and daughters to allow us to interrupt their vacation so that he could join us here. So thank you and them so very much for doing that. Mr. Garti-Tagoe also joined Duke, well, prior to joining Duke, he was a partner at McGuire Woods LLP in Richmond, Virginia. And then he actually became the Chief Legal Officer in 2019 at Duke Energy, as well as serving as corporate secretary. And again, we'll go through all of that. But before doing all of those fabulous things, he actually was involved with Duke from 2002. So we're talking about now, we're at about almost like you, 20 years later, that you are now situated in an amazing position, but you worked your way up. I mean, you did that going through various positions, and now he is the Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer, and Corporate Secretary at Duke Energy. So he's a primary legal advisor to Duke's Energy's Board of Directors and Senior Management. He leads the Office of the General Counsel, which includes the company's legal, corporate governance, internal audit, and ethics and compliance functions. So that's a mouthful to say that when you think about Duke Energy, you think about the top echelon there with the board of directors, which is at the very top, and there as well as Mr. Garti-Tagoe. So that's amazing. So as we begin, I want to thank you as well for being my friend. I'm very honored to be able to share this opportunity with you as a conversation, and thank you for being willing to open it as a conversation as opposed to a lecture style. We will have several questions that were submitted by the persons and participants, but also hopefully we can get through those and be able to talk, have actually the students, other participants be able to join us via video and as well audio to be able to ask some questions, which I know they will have lots of them. So if we could begin with you giving us a brief description of your background. I know I've gone into great detail about it, but being a child growing up in Ghana and then being here as the top echelon at Duke Energy, let us know what that was like and how you became interested in law. Okay.
First, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join this conference. This conference is very important to me. I was there at the beginning. I think I attended the very first one 20 or so years ago, or 15 years ago, I think it was. And I am very grateful that the Mecklenburg County Bar has seen it fit to continue this program, continue to expose as many people as possible to the opportunities that are presented by the legal profession, and also to expose them to all the law schools, particularly those that are registered this year, to share how they can get in and thrive in those institutions. So thank you very much for having this conference, and thank you for including me. Now to your question, how did I get here? Very interesting question. I mean, I think you've shared about half my story already. I was born in Ghana. I don't know if everyone knows where Ghana is, but it's on the west coast of Africa. The two largest countries nearest to Ghana are Nigeria and Cote d'Ivoire, or the Ivory Coast. And Ghana sits on the coast. The Gulf of Guinea is the name of the, actually it's part of the Atlantic Ocean, but that body of water is called the Gulf of Guinea. I grew up on the coast, was born there, went to school, lived along the coast. And I was fortunate when I finished high school that my father was in a position to encourage me to go abroad to study. So I ended up at McGill University in Montreal, and it was in September. I remember very well, I landed September 8th of 1982. And I don't know what the temperature was, but it felt like minus 50 because I came from an environment where the average temperature year round is 86 degrees. I did not own a winter coat, and I just had a suit jacket on, and I managed for a couple of days until a friend took me to go buy a coat. But, you know, I had the opportunity to study there, and I took it. It was a huge culture shock adapting to the environment there. I had never lived outside Africa before. And even then, I'd only lived in Zambia, which is another African country in the East, for only 3 months. Other than that, my entire life had been in Ghana. So there was a lot of adaptation that was required to succeed, and a lot of being open to advice and mentoring from others. So for example, when I left home, I was going to go major in economics. And one of the first people I met there happened to be a woman from Ghana who was also an economics major, but who was doing a joint degree in economics and finance. And so she said, you could do both, and that degree would be worth more to you than your general economics degree. And that's how I ended up in the honors program, just following her advice. You know, it was somebody I had barely met, and yet I thought the advice was sound. So I took it, I did the joint degree. And I look back now and I say, gee, it was like I knew I was going to end up in a utility company practicing regulatory law, right, when I picked those majors, because they're the most useful majors I could ever pick for the job that I do, or I came to do at Duke Energy, for example. So that was fantastic. So that's just a throw in about mentoring for free. But beyond that, you know, at the time, my sister attended East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina. And she had a boyfriend who lived in Durham, North Carolina. And so one summer I decided to come down to visit him. And I took the train, and it was about a 24-hour trip. And it was quite a trip. But even I landed in Durham in I think it was summer of 1983. And back in those days in Durham, the only thing you could do was to go visit the Duke University campus. And so that was one of the first things we did. And I set foot on the campus and decided, boy, I love this place. I'd love to go to school here someday. And that's how I ended up picking Duke to go to law school. In fact, I only applied to 2 law schools in the United States, Duke University and Santa Clara University in California. And I only applied there because they wrote me and said, we'll give you a scholarship if you apply and if you come. So otherwise, Duke was going to be the only school I would have applied to in the United States. And I was fortunate enough to be admitted. I went in there and thankfully graduated. And then I got a job right out of law school and I took it. The first job I got, I took. I had no idea what they did, but it was advertised as an associate position in a firm that focused on public utility regulation. I had no clue what that was, but it was a job, so I took it. And lo and behold, here I am, all these decades later, still involved with the utility industry. But it was a great opportunity, a great training ground for me. Managed to parlay that into a couple of other jobs in Richmond, Virginia, before I joined Duke in 2002. And here at Duke, as you mentioned, I've had the opportunity to do different things. I came in as a regulatory lawyer. A couple of years later, I was promoted to lead our litigation practice. And then a few years later, got promoted to lead our commercial business practice as our commercial lawyer, which was really not my background. But I've had the opportunity to practice different kinds of law here at Duke, and then now ultimately sitting in the general counsel seat, overseeing every kind of law that we practice here at Duke. So it's been a very interesting journey. It's been a rewarding one for me. It's been a very fulfilling one, not without its ups and downs, but we've been able to navigate through all of that, and here we sit today.
You mentioned about mentoring and how important you believe that was and putting that plug in. So who were your mentors and how did you select or how did they select you?
I've had tons of mentors, many mentors in my life, some knowingly and some unknowingly, to your point. Sometimes you select them, sometimes they select you, and sometimes nobody knows who's selecting who, but you're looking at someone. I'll tell you a basic story. Several years ago, I was invited to a wedding, and I remember it was a friend's son's wedding, but I hadn't seen the son or had any interaction with him for decades. So I asked his parents why he had invited me, and they said, well, he was in elementary school when you were in law school at Duke University. And he essentially pointed you out and said, I want to be like him. And so started observing me and following my career. And so he thought he had that special relationship with me, and so wanted me to be at his wedding. I had no idea, right? So that back to my point, sometimes you don't know who is watching you, but somebody is watching you all the time, right? And so there are people that I've observed and people I read about or read their work, and I consider them mentors. But more directly though, I always say I've had some very influential mentors in my life, not counting my parents, of course. I remember my very first job. There was a man there named Jim Hallwood, who I worked with very closely. And he took a keen interest in my job, in my work. And I remember when I first decided to leave that firm, him inviting me to his house for breakfast while his daughter was in town so I could talk to her, because she did some development work, which at the time I thought I was interested in. And, that was very impactful to me, even though I didn't follow that path. The fact that the man took the time to invest in me in that way was very impressive to me. And then I moved to Richmond, Virginia, and I was hired by a man named Ed Flippen. And I'll tell you a funny story, and I don't think he'll mind me sharing this publicly. Ed Flippen did not have a job opening when I applied to his firm. And he said, he looked at my resume, couldn't tell whether I was female or male, couldn't tell where I was from because it was a foreign name he'd never seen before. And he saw that I went to school in Quebec and concluded I was a French woman. And he said, gee, I've never met a French woman before. Maybe I'll invite him for an interview. And that's how I got an interview with this firm. And even though they didn't have an opening, they still hired me because once I got in the door, I was able to impress them enough to get the opportunity. Ed has become a lifelong friend now. And, one of the things I've learned from Ed was about spending time helping people. Ed Flippen wrote a self-published book about how friends can help friends find jobs. At any one time, this man had about 10 resumes, and he was actively trying to find jobs for people. And so right now I find myself at any one time, I have at least 3 or 4 resumes where I'm trying to help people find jobs, and that was from Ed Flippen's influence, right? And then I remember one time I had an offer to go work at another law firm in Richmond, Virginia. And Ed Flippen comes in my office and says, so how much money are you going to ask for when you ask for your salary requirements, which does happen. And at the time I looked at how much I was making, and I added like $5,000 to it. So just to give you perspective, let's say I was making $60,000. I said, I'm going to ask for $65,000. And Ed Flippen said, what? They should pay you $90,000 and not blink.
Yeah.
So guess what? Yeah. So I went into the interview and they asked me, how much money are you looking for? I said, $90,000. Guess what? I got it. I ended up work there. But I share this story because sometimes your mentors better understand your own value than you yourself, right? Because most of us undersell ourselves. We think we're incapable when we're capable. We think we're limited when we in fact can do much more than and others who receive from you, others that you work with, many times are in a better position to help you with that perspective. And Ed Flippen helped me with that perspective in that instance. And then I come to Duke Energy, and the guy who hired me is now our state senator, Paul Newton. Paul saw me in a meeting one day. Duke was a client. I'd come down, do presentations. And one day I came down, and after the meeting, he calls me. He says, we'd love for you to come work for us. And the first year I said no. Then the next year he calls me back. And actually my firm had come to interview to represent Duke Energy on some matters. And so I came down to the presentation with my good friend, Ed Flippen. And after that, a week later, Paul calls me and says, I've got good news and bad news. Which one do you want to hear first? I said, okay, give me the bad news. I don't know what that means in terms of my personality, but Ed says, the bad news is we're going to hire a different firm. We're not going to hire you. And I said, oh, that's disappointing. So I asked him why and all of that. And he explained it to me. And he said, well, but the good news is, remember the conversation we had a year ago? I really want you to think about coming to work for us. And here's a job that I have essentially created for you. And I thought, gee, my wife is not going to want to move, all of that. But anyway, I listened to him. I went home, told my wife, and she said, sure, I think you should look into it. That was the first surprise. And so I looked into it, and lo and behold, within 2 weeks, I had a job offer from Duke Energy. And Ed and Paul Newton, even though he was my boss, was also a mentor to me, because he would pull me aside and give me some frank feedback about things, and in plain language. Because unfortunately, sometimes when you work in an organization, people are concerned about hurting feelings and all of that, so they sugarcoat the feedback, and you never really get the true feedback. I've been in meetings where people have been told they were given feedback about something, and these people are talking about something different. I'm wondering, did they not hear it the first time? They heard what they wanted to hear, maybe because it was sugar-coated or not frankly given. But Paul was not like that. He was very frank with me. I remember one time I did some work for him, and Paul pulled me aside and said, look, I don't think you would have done this for person X, who was his boss at the time. You didn't put in the time that you needed to put in for this. And he was very disappointed. And usually when you have a mentor you respect, you take those kind of criticisms to heart too. It hurts, but it's important. It's important enough he took the time to tell you. And it makes you work harder, it makes you work better, and it makes you more effective. And so Paul is another very valuable mentor I have had here at Duke. And there are many more, in almost every aspect of life, whether it's my spiritual, my home life, whatever it is. There are various people I consider mentors, and I allowed them to speak to me plainly, and I take what they have to say and try to make the changes or continue doing the things. It's not always negative. Sometimes it's positive. Continue to do the things that they encourage me to do.
Very good.
I'm a big believer in mentoring, if you don't know.
I'm with you. I am definitely with you. Now, as you've said, mentoring and making sure you're there for others, our young people want to know, do you provide mentorship or internship opportunities with Duke Energy or beyond?
So certainly, I mean, here at Duke, we've got formal mentoring programs and informal mentoring programs. In fact, just last week, I got an email from one of our organizations called the Leadership Development Network, wanted me to mentor another employee I don't know. I've never met him, right? But that's a formal relationship they're setting up. But within my own organization, the Office of General Counsel, we have a formal mentoring program that we offer to any employee who wishes to sign up, but also for new employees who come in the door. I insist that we assign each one of them a mentor, if for no other reason than to help them quickly adapt to the culture that we have, right? To learn not to waste time to figure out how we do ABC, right? Which new employees are apt to do unless they get clear guidance. So we provide that as a formal program for our new employees as well. But in terms of, outsiders calling me, yeah, people call me. I get emails on LinkedIn or just cold calls. I got a call from a guy at a local law firm about 2 years ago, and he said, I want you to be my mentor. And we chatted for a bit. And I said, absolutely. But I'm going to put the burden on you to do all the work, schedule the meetings, come in with topics, things you want to talk about, and all of that. Well, sadly, I have not heard from him in 2 years. So that's the other side of things. If you want a mentor, you cannot put the burden on the mentor. Right. The mentor will do what they can do, but there are circumstances where they will say, I want you to show me your commitment. Right. And that's what I was expecting from this gentleman. And I never heard back from him. And, there are others who reach out regularly. There was a guy who a couple of years ago applied for a job at Duke. And he wanted me to intervene on something, which I did. He got the job. Not necessarily because I intervened, but he got the job because he was absolutely qualified. And he came in and, at least once a year, I've never worked with this guy. I've never met him in person, but at least once a year, he gives me an update. He shoots me a note to tell me how well he's doing, what he's doing, how much he enjoys the job. And just this week, he emailed me because he's been named by the Carolina Ledger as top 40 over 40. And he wanted me to come join and participate in his celebration. That just warms my heart, right? When you are able to relate to somebody who's achieving their goals and making progress in that way. So the short answer to your question is yes. And we do have internships. We participate in the Mecklenburg County Charlotte Legal Diversity Clerkship Program. We also partner with the North Carolina Bar Association and provide internships, mostly for minority lawyers here in North Carolina as well. And then I think in Florida, we partner with Stetson School and we have an intern from their law school as well. So there are not very many opportunities, but the short answer is yes, we do both.
Very good. So you've talked about what inspires you. Obviously, that story showed us that that young person being able to go beyond probably what he even imagined was what keeps you going. Now, I'm sure, though, throughout your amazing career was always not just easygoing, happy, no problems whatsoever. So how have you handled those microaggressions, discriminatory behavior from others in and outside of the profession?
Well, so my number one rule is I'm never going to be the victim, right? If you've got a problem and want to reflect it on me through your microaggression, it's your problem. I will not let it keep me down. I remember a story of the first law firm I worked at, spending a month there before I went off to study for the bar exam, and I took the North Carolina bar. And the day I was leaving, this man comes up to me and says, "Don't ask me what we'll do if you fail the bar. Nobody here has ever failed the bar." And I was the first Black person, the lawyer the firm had hired. So, it just made me wonder, why would he say that to me? Is he expecting me to fail the bar? And it frustrated me, and my response to him was, well, I got to make sure I pass the bar. And guess what? When I came back in August, I walked in with my letter from the North Carolina Board of Bar Examiners that said passed. And I showed it to him, and he didn't have to tell me what he was going to do if I failed the bar. But it did irritate me that he would say something like that to me. And there've been other incidents. But again, my basic rule is I'm not going to let anyone victimize me, right? If you doubt me, I will prove you wrong. I don't operate just to prove people wrong. That's the other thing. That's just wasted energy, in my opinion. But I've got goals. I've got a vision. I've got my why, and I continue to plow that why. And ultimately, it leads to success that others can see. And those kind of folks who choose to waste their time and are not happy with themselves, that's what it boils down to. If you think you have to pull someone down to prove your worth, you're just not happy with yourself. I think the problem is with you, not with me.
So, and I know our time is ticking away quickly, and it doesn't seem like it's already getting close, as we want to make sure that if there are a couple other questions that young people want to ask, but in getting through our questions, which we have several more, but what have you done or continue to do to address issues like equity and social justice?
That's another very important issue to me. I can tell you, when I came to Duke had won awards for its diversity programs from the Minority Corporate Counsel Association, which is an organization based in Washington, D.C. But I did not see any intentional effort to diversify our employee base, particularly the legal department. And so I made it my mission. And so we created a committee. I got a general counsel. I was not the general counsel at the time. I was a regular employee, so you might say, right? And but I went and advocated for change. And so I got a supportive general counsel who came in, and just based on his own experience, he said he remembers that when he himself first joined his first law firm, he joined with a Black man, and very quickly he noticed he was getting more assignments than the Black man. He was getting more support than the Black man. So he saw that in his own life, in his own experience, in his own firm, things were inequitable. And so he could appreciate why I would be concerned about things like that in our own department and in the law firms that we use, right? So we set up a program where we set out our expectations for not only us internally to be a diverse team, but requiring that our law firms, the law firms that do work for Duke Energy, also give us diverse teams. For me, it's in addition to it being a matter of equity, it's also a matter of profit and loss. It doesn't make any sense to me that someone would intentionally leave some of their players off the field when those players can help win the game. If I want to put it in March Madness terms, it is March Madness time, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, that's the way I feel about it. There's a presumption that maybe minorities are not as equipped as others, and that's absolutely false. And I will tell you this. For those who don't know, you can look up McKinsey & Co. It's a famous consulting firm here in the United States. And they've done all these studies. They've done it, I think, 3 or 4 years in a row now. And the evidence becomes stronger and stronger every year they do this. That companies that have diverse teams or that are led by diverse teams earn more than companies that are not. So it absolutely impacts the bottom line. So for me, in addition to being a matter of equity, I think we're not doing ourselves justice if we choose not to pursue diversity and inclusion and equity and make sure that everyone gets a fair shot at the opportunities that are available.
Very good. Now, I have a couple of big questions here at the end within our last couple of minutes, and then we'll have to seek permit. Well, I don't do well with seeking permission. I ask for forgiveness that we take, as you know well, that we take the 5-minute break to be able to allow young people to ask you questions too. But two things. One, what would you want to see as your legacy? And that might have been something you would tell your younger self as well. And then two, which is I think a big one for thinking about being in the legal profession. How do you do it all? You've got your career, you've got your family, you have your community involvement, and folks talk about balancing. I believe in juggling, so that you figure out what's the first one that is on fire and you give yourself to that with your presence. But other people think about balancing, which concerns me because I think that means you have to do everything perfectly everywhere all the time. So what is it that you think? How do you do it? And how do you want to leave that legacy?
So in terms of legacy, and when you talk about legacy, you're thinking about how do people think of you when you're not around? One of the things that has always bothered me is that I would die and nobody know why I left. So you think about it in those terms and you say to yourself, what do you want people to think or remember about why you left? Why were you brought here on earth? And for me, I sum it up in three points. One, he loved his family. I never want anyone in my family to say, I love my job more than my family. Right? As hard as I work, I never want my kids to say that. And thankfully, they've never said that. I love my family dearly. I also want people to say, gee, he may not have been given much, but he maximized the talents that he had. He maximized his gifts. I'm one who believes all of us have gifts. And he maximized his. And I maximized it in service of others, whether it's my family or others. Right. So that's the thread that I want my legacy to reflect, that I maximize my gifts in service of my family and others. And then how do you work-life balance? I never use the term work-life balance. Yes. I don't talk in those terms like you. It's almost like the left hand must equal the right hand.
Yes.
And it never happens that way. There are days when the left hand must be bigger than the right hand. And there are days when the right hand must be bigger, So it's a point of prioritizing what's important, not sweating the small stuff. You asked about what I would tell my younger self. That's one I would absolutely tell my younger self. Do not sweat the small stuff. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the book, first published, I think it was 1997, by Richard Carlson, who unfortunately has passed away. But he wrote the book and it became a franchise. Don't sweat the small stuff in love. Don't sweat the small stuff in work and all of that. But the basic premise of that is we waste so much time worrying about little things that it actually inhibits us from enjoying life, being in the moment and being happy in life. Right. So I'll tell you this. I was not the top student at Duke Law School. I may not even have been in the top average student. Put it that way, and I would agonize over my grades, and I remember in a meeting just like this, a conference just like this, someone asked me, so what would you have done differently if you had to do over again? And my first response was, I would have gotten better grades in law school. Because frankly, I was one of those kids who did well in elementary school. Well, I did repeat second grade, but that's a different story. I did well in elementary school. I did well in high school. I did well in college. And then I get to law school and I have a hard time there. Right. So I said, I wish I'd gotten, just as excellent grades in law school as I did everywhere else. And the person looked at me and said, gee, doesn't seem to have hurt you any. Because at the time I was in leadership here at Duke. And it seemed like I had still been able to succeed without my grades. And that was great perspective for me, right? So life is imperfect, and that's the thing about don't sweat the small stuff. Free yourself from perfection. You don't have to be perfect. And I think I'll tell my younger self that, don't sweat the small stuff. Be in the moment, celebrate your victories, overcome your challenges, and everything will work out in the end.
Thank you. Well, I tell you, I was going to ask you to summarize, but that was it, that you did that, and to make sure that our young people understand that you still can get to the position where we have our beloved Mr. Garti Tago, and he is the top of the Duke Energy area. So I know that I am pushing it since we go to our next panel sessions, but I was not sure, Ms. North or Ms. Gamushio, if we wanted to just go ahead and leave it and have others submit their questions, and hopefully you would be able to respond to their questions.
And I promise to be short.
All right.
We can just roll right into the next session.
Okay. And so if you do have still questions for Mr. Garti Tago, please make sure you put them in the chat, and he will be, he's amazing. He'll be very responsive, just down to earth person, and get you those responses. So thank you, my friends.
Wait, Your Honor, what I mean is we can roll into the next session, like you all can do the Q&A, and we'll roll into the next session after answering the questions.
Oh, okay. Look, I thought I was in trouble for going over.
So students, now is the time for you to unmute and turn your video on, and do it now expeditiously. Don't be shy. Go ahead and raise your hands. We'll call on your name, and you can unmute yourself and show your video and ask Mr. Garti Tago any questions that you have with him.
And remember, he said maximize your opportunities. So ask the questions, please.
And this is how you set yourself apart in these settings. So go ahead and do it.
I could go first. Hi, my name is Benita. I'm a senior at UNCC, double majoring in criminal justice and political science. You talked a lot about mentorships, and I was wondering if there are any other resources for professional development that you recommend for young people to invest in or to look into.
Professional development. So, I know of one program, for example, at Duke University, where they bring students like you on campus for a week or two and prepare you for law school, prepare you to take the LSAT, and it's all free, right? So I would encourage you to reach out to Duke University, for example, and find out about the PLUS program. The lady who runs it, her name is Ebony Bryant. She runs that, and it's a pipeline program. So I'd encourage you to reach out. There's also a national organization that's a pipeline program. So just put your fingers to work, go online, Google pipeline, legal pipeline programs, and you will find, I bet there are other universities that do it. So it's for somebody in your position, if you want to experience what law school would be like. Right. This is a program where you would go on campus, live on campus, and be taught by law school professors, and give you a better idea of what life would be like. And once you go in, and I see someone mentioned in the chat that CLEO also does something similar. I forget what CLEO stands for, but that's also an American Bar Association related program, I believe. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. Yes, it was.
No, I also saw in the chat where they were asking, what does your typical day look like? And I know we talked about that a little bit, but to be able to share with them.
So my typical day, it depends on what day of the week. So Mondays, for example, one thing I wish I had mentioned, I didn't mention, in terms of, we talked about balancing, and I'm saying I don't really think in terms of balancing, but you need something that grounds you. One of the things that grounds me is my faith, right? So I'll give you on Mondays at 7:30, a couple of guys and I get together for a devotion on the phone. Sometimes it's while I'm driving to work. Then I get to work, and usually my first meeting is our senior management team meeting. So there are 11 executives here at Duke Energy that essentially run the company. We don't do everything. I mean, this is a 29,000 employee company. So lots of leaders, but the 11 are, we call the senior management team. And we get together usually on Mondays for at least 3-4 hours, sometimes for a whole day. And we're talking about the business, what's happening in transmission, what's happening. And for those of you who don't know, Duke Energy is one of the largest holding energy companies. We supply electricity and natural gas, electricity in 6 states and natural gas in about 4 or 5 states. And then we own wind farms and solar farms in about 20 plus other states around the country. So it's a huge business, right? Huge business. Our capital is like $160 billion in terms of capital that we have in, iron in the ground kind of stuff. So there are lots of issues. And as a leader of the company, I'm involved in the business issues, but I'm also involved in legal issues. That's my primary function. If anyone has a legal issue, it bubbles up to my team. If it's major enough, it comes to me, right? So my typical day after these meetings, I spend a lot of time answering questions, or sometimes, coming up with questions myself for other people. But a lot of times it's about legal issues, they run from simple stuff, like one of our drivers run into somebody on the highway and they're suing us, to stuff. Actually, we have a case recently where a father and son-in-law were trimming trees around their hunting posts, and their saw contacted one of our lines. The son was electrocuted, unfortunately passed away. So they've sued us. So we'll deal with cases like that. And then sometimes, it doesn't happen often, but occasionally we get into mergers and acquisitions, like we bought Piedmont Natural Gas in 2017. And the legal work associated with buying and selling companies also comes up from time to time, depending on what day it is. But no 1-2 days are quite similar for me. The issues just are so numerous, and they just pop up when they pop up. So you deal with that accordingly.
All right, thank you so much. I know there are lots more questions, but we're asking that they be put in the chat, and then we'll forward them to you to be able to respond. Thank you so very much for that amazing opportunity to share in the conversation, and for others to get to see you.
My
So
pleasure.
thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much to our wonderful keynote speaker, Mr. Garti Tago, for being here today. Our next panel is Getting Through Law School. Now, please self-select your appropriate breakout room and have fun, y'all. See you soon.